Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
WESN.
Good morning. Once again, this is Talking About on WESN, the Content Capital Show. Michael Small here. Beautiful morning. Another day, another SOE, another example of the population not necessarily complying with the spirit of a state of emergency. Or let me not paint everybody under a broad brush, but I just found it ironic and ridiculous, this whole situation with the maxi taxi driver assaulting a licensing officer. During a state of emergency, it's almost like if it doesn't exist. Now, first off, let me say, I'm not condoning what the maxi taxi driver did. He has been arrested. He should be arrested. But I think this is another example of a population with a significant subsection, a significant fraction that distrusts authority to the point of being hostile. And while any sort of actions like this, no matter how it can be argued to be justified, assuming the licensing officer didn't throw the first punch, right? It doesn't matter what the licensing officer does. You can't go and initiate physical violence in the street against an agent of the state. It's similar to what we say about the police. If the police are doing something wrong, comply and make your case after the fact. Now, of course, a licensing officer is not quite a police officer, but still, to say that you feel wrong, say you're going to assault him or her, that's not doing yourself any favors. That said, one of the things any government, governing body, leadership group, leadership authority needs to consider is when it seems as though too many of the population decide that they have an entitlement to act out as they wish, or they mistrust the system and the agents of the system to the point where they feel that they need to act out in such a manner. Leadership, governance, is not just, well, we lock them up when it happens, but rather, why did it happen and how do we prevent it from happening? Because a state is not in the business of locking up its citizens. And one of the things that we know is there is low trust and confidence in law enforcement. a lot of people don't necessarily want to have the patience and understanding when it comes to road traffic offenses. In part because the entire system is out of whack. We see road traffic offenses every day, speeding being the obvious one. And generally speaking, how often when you speak to people does the whole designated driver system come up? Rarely. So, what is one to do? Because if the only solution is just to lock people up when they're belligerent, what happens if they continue to be belligerent? This happened during a state of emergency. But I guess a state of emergency doesn't mean what it did. It's no longer really a state of emergency. It's a state of, I don't even know what to call it. How could it be an emergency when we've more or less been operating in emergency mode for the majority of the last year? Then is it really an emergency? Is it a state of emergency? Or is it just another state of being? If this lasts long enough, it'll be just another Tuesday. Licensing officers already contribute to their own public perception. Just like how people view to a certain extent, police being corrupt, I have no doubt people will also view licensing officers to a certain extent being corrupt. There's a whole situation with regards to the unofficial racket on getting one's license. There's the whole perception of when licensing officers descend on various communities or islands in order to conduct exercises and being unable to sufficiently explain themselves to all of the civilian stakeholders involved who are concerned about the situation, so as to disarm their negative assumptions on those exercises. The solution can't be, well, it's not our fault, they don't understand. Because then that's subjecting the people to oppression, not governing. Or policing. Policing is not just arresting, as I have been told by current and former police officers. And of course, anything to do with road traffic offenses and fines and the enforcement of those rules are going to be contentious. Part of it is we don't enforce it regularly enough, uniformly enough. So ironically, part of it is to enforce the law consistently. You don't need heavy-handed penalties for that. You just need consistency. But we're not going to have that because consistency is, at times, seemingly a foreign concept to government bureaucracy, right? That's point number one. Dare I say, also seems to be a foreign concept to certain aspects of the criminal justice system and law enforcement leadership. But then on top of that now, the trust and confidence situation is only going to get worse if you don't actively try to put things in place to make it better. And just inherently, people are not going to be kindly or take kindly to road traffic stops, to any agent of the state coming to potentially give you, and the heavier the fine, potentially the more aggressive and upset the individuals might be. So ironically, although I do think this is not necessarily going to be something of great significant relevance, I don't necessarily think it's going to be completely insignificant either. The attempts to improve road safety with heavy-handed penalties might actually lead to citizens acting out more and engaging in violence against agents of the state due to the anger of something that is unpopular with them. And it just makes me wonder, what is the long-term plan in all of this? Has it been thought out? I will say this about the PNM. I do think they think things through. I don't necessarily agree with all of their conclusions. But I do think they think things through. And at times, that caused them to err on the side of caution, aka chicken out. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to upset the people. And at times, that's not the right move. So I'm not necessarily saying you can't look to make changes. It's just that at times, these changes don't seem to be well thought out. These changes don't seem to necessarily consider all of the variables and the potential long-term outcomes that you can't fully control. This is one of the hard parts of democracy. At the end of the day, democracy, in its most basic sense, is a society run by the will of the people, which means that everyone's will converges, that everyone's own personal preferences, choices, biases has some effect. And one of the examples of that is when people decide to act out against agents of the state. Fair, firm, consistent law enforcement, not heavy-handed law enforcement. But dare I ask, how often do you see the former and how often do you see the latter? Where it seems as though even the TTPS cannot help themselves but act like a substitute teacher who only knows how to stereotype everybody it meets and sees. Not all officers, but unfortunately the bad ones with the poor judgment show up too often, even if there are significantly small minority or ridiculously small minority. They show up too often. Case in point, there is a situation where a former police officer, a police officer sued the state. Why did he sue the state? He sued the state because while he was conducting a surveillance exercise, other police officers came, confronted him, and arrested him at gunpoint. And he was kept in custody for 4 days. I'm not entirely sure if he was charged with anything. One of the issues is, here's a police officer now. The police arrested their own. And what do I always say about the rights of people who are arrested? It's not about protecting criminals. It could happen to you. Well, it happened to a police officer, because now he is describing the degrading conditions of how he was kept detained. Sleep on cold concrete floors, which were infested with cockroaches, rats, and flies. Walls that were contaminated with waste, and by waste, human waste. But it gets better. Trust and confidence, right? If it could happen to a police officer, it could happen to you. Well, not only did they arrest a police officer on duty, but apparently the officer who ordered the arrest admitted at trial he did not actually believe that the plaintiff had committed any offense. The officer who ordered the arrest did not believe that the individual committed any offense, and yet he was arrested anyway and detained for 4 days. I didn't even know if you could hold someone for 4 days without charging them. Maybe I'm wrong. And apparently, this is not the first time this officer sued the state. $160,000. This basically hits everything that is of my concern. Because if a police officer could be wrongfully arrested, who is the rest of us? Because he was held for 4 days. One would imagine he would have had access to his credentials. He would have been able to, I would have thought, have access to some sort of legal counsel. His superiors might have inquired his whereabouts. He wasn't detained for 4 hours, he was detained for 4 days. If this could happen to a police officer, what about the rest of us? If the conditions that he is being held in could be so deplorable, what about the rest of us? And if his rights could be so violated, what about the rest of us? And then when you consider one of the specific rights that was violated, well, I don't think he actually committed an offense. That goes back to now, how do we trust the system? Because people are not going to necessarily look at situations and analyze them with all their complexity, with the greatest degree of accuracy. Some people aren't going to care that this was police and the situation with the maxi driver was a licensing officer. To them, it's all the same. Government is a scam. Politicians are corrupt. They thief from the treasury. And now they want these licensing officers to thief with these road traffic regulations and fines. There's going to be a subset of us who's not going to care about the details and differentiating one circumstance from the other. They're going to basically say, look, see, it's all corrupt. And instead of, again, trying to put things in place to improve how the public perceives agents of the state, it seems as though those in charge are more than happy with the status quo. Because one of the things that the Congress of the People said is body cameras should be mandatory. And one of the things that should be mandatory for is road traffic stops. If a licensing officer is going to engage with the public, they should have body cameras as well. But road safety is a priority. The safety of the citizens and protecting them from violent crime is a priority. But somehow, body cameras are not a priority. They're too expensive. It's going to cost half the budget. $3.8 billion as an extra expense in back pay for a political promise is not too expensive. Don't mind the fact that they can't pay it off yet. But it's not too expensive. But spending $20, $30 million on a body camera system, oh no, that's too expensive. That's way too expensive. No, we're fine. We're fine how we are. Because in my mind, we're not fine. And this situation, now granted, you could do everything right and still have a maxi driver assault a licensing officer. That can happen. However, tell me that citizens are not going to react the same way to police. Is that reasonable to assume? If our society trusted law enforcement more, isn't it not reasonable to think situations like this will be less likely to happen? Because as much as I think there's at least some amount of sympathy for the licensing officer, I won't be surprised if in some parts of the country that sympathy has limits. So, meanwhile, there's another security situation I find interesting. So, officers of the Coastal and Air Support Unit at the Carnage Police Station detained 21 migrants on Monday night in the Western Peninsula. Cool. They responded to information from the radar center about a target heading towards Carnage. Cool. They detained the group, 11 adults, 8 adult females, 2 male, and children aged 16 and 6. Just 2 children, I believe, right? My thing is, this is interesting to me. Because what was the difference here and all them times before? Do we have that much traffic in our waters? Do we have that little control? Remember, there was not enough of this during COVID. When there was, so I know people are like, hey, you don't know how much traffic there is on the seas, it's difficult. Hey, during COVID, when there wasn't really supposed to be that much civilian small boat traffic, right? Where there wasn't supposed to be people coming into our waters, we didn't necessarily hear of situations like this happening. Now we hear about it. Now we hear about it. Wait, is it that they're no longer concerned about revealing the fact that we have a radar center? It was already known to the criminals. And we do know that at any day, it's not as though they secretly intercept people and just don't tell us. We know it's the opposite. The smugglers secretly bring in people. And by secret, it's an open secret more often than not. And what they don't tell us is why the radar center is seemingly useless. So I appreciate this story of a positive outcome. It's just that you can't throw this story out there and expect me to be like, oh, look, it's working now, I'm so happy. No, I would like an explanation as to what made this situation different than other previous situations. Because there's a lot of conspiracy theories that could come into this. And it once again goes back into trust and confidence in law enforcement and the criminal justice system in this country. And I get it. Look, the current government inherited a bad situation. They went in charge during COVID. They went in charge for the years after COVID. They didn't oversee the situation. And as it got worse, it made the problem grow. And now they have this huge problem on their hands. That's cool. Just why does it feel as though they are also being rather negligent in solving a lot of the problems with law enforcement? Because we get more or less similar outcomes and similar results. The only difference is the SOEs and what America did for a few months. And maybe America will come back, hopefully not to just shoot boats first and ask questions later. I would like to know, what was the radar center doing before this situation? Because as people pointed out, we don't need the American radar, we have our own. Cool. We also technically, we're not supposed to need American ships, we have our own. Maybe we need to just stop fooling ourselves and spending money on assets that provide very little output. And this is what I don't understand ultimately. Because at the very least in the police service, We know that there are members of the police service that have some pride in their job, that have some dedication to duty. I have yet to hear any such example outside of the support elements that respond to disaster relief. I have yet to hear any other example within the Defense Force in its entirety. The only examples out of the Defense Force, that's Coast Guard, Regiment, etc., are the bad examples. We hear nothing about the good. We see no good results. The last time I heard about Coast Guard intervening on a boat bringing in illegals was when a baby got shot. That's the last one I could remember, and how long ago was that? Last thing I'll say before I'll take the break. I guess this is newsworthy, but there's American personnel occupying rooms in Backrock being accommodated there. Grafton Beach, sorry, being accommodated there. I don't have an issue with this. I hope no one tries to make it an issue. I don't know. I just feel as though somehow it's going to start to become political. Now, to some extent, I could actually appreciate, hey, look, a local hotel, yes, I know there's more context behind it. I'm not going there. They're getting some amount of business, right? Right now, the tourist season is probably not looking so hot. The Hotel Association notwithstanding, I have never really heard of such an extensive foreign tourist season to extend all the way into March in these current times. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And also during Lent, this is post-Carnival, you're not really going to see that much Trinis until Easter. And Grafton is relatively removed from the wider areas of civilian activity, while still being close enough that it's not way too far out in the countryside, and has reasonable road access to get wherever they need to go. Some people might be concerned, look, there's more of a military presence of the Americans. Again, I hate to break this, but give us an alternative from US military assistance when it comes to protecting our maritime borders. Have an alternative. Because we've already said here on Talking Point, it's not as though we could deal with transnational cartels on our own. Right now, they are within the realm of normal criminal activity. But just ask Mexico. And at some point, if the Americans and the Mexicans and other members of the coalition are successful in suppressing cartel operations along the Mexican-American border, and are successful in suppressing drug smuggling routes going up Central America through the southern US border, well, the criminals will pivot. They may pivot to Canada. I've heard that before. But they might also pivot to us. I would rather we be better prepared to deal with that. This also could be the TEMA support. I believe they're starting off in Tobago. US military personnel with our emergency management organizations. I'll say this, part of me wonders, is it really the emergency management agencies that needs to improve, or potentially is it the political leadership that needs to have a better understanding about emergency response, not the cleanup after the fact, but within the moments. That said, we haven't necessarily seen this government facing such a challenge just yet. So we can't prematurely judge them on it. Hopefully, we could go through a few years without ever having to answer that question. Let's take a break, and when we come back, good ladies should be here. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WESN. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I am Emiliana Beechan, and I am a mental health and conflict resolution consultant. Welcome to Mind Matters, the show where we explore the intricate world of mental health and the art of conflict resolution. Join us as we hear from mental health professionals, conflict resolution experts, and everyday people who have transformed their lives through understanding and communication. Mind Matters, WESN Content Capital.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas, and Movie Town, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
This is 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm not to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of
not
Let's go to the last part.
Problems trying to get aroused, women
Loss
who
of
have
libido.
loss of libido, and women who have problems actually trying to achieve an orgasm, something as simple as that. So all of those things tend to happen a little bit further along after the hot flashes and the night sweats, but they are real symptoms. They do exist, and they get pushed under the rug quite a lot. So they are commonly underdiagnosed, they're underreported, they're underdiagnosed, they're undertreated.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
I'm back here and talk about the WSND Content Capital, and right now, the world is changing, and we have been speaking about it on Talking Point with the good lady herself, and as things unfolds, I guess now there's a lot of questions with regards to what will be our place in the world moving forward. Meanwhile, I myself have certain questions with regards to when you look at domestic messaging, international messaging, what exactly is the actual consistency when you put those two things together? What assumptions are we willing to make as a population on how things are going? And ultimately, what is the direction of the country, given the fact that we are not food secure and we primarily depend on a very volatile international industry to prop up our economy, because we haven't figured that one out yet. Doesn't look like we're going to figure it out anytime soon. So to have this wide-reaching conversation, which we will try to limit as much as possible for the sake of time and clarity. I am joined with, of course, the good lady herself, Karen Nessishera. Karen, good morning.
Good morning to you, Sean. And yes, I was the one that sort of insisted that we should look back at this issue and do a deeper dive, because I know last week we looked at, well, I think not briefly, but at least we looked at the question of our alignment with U.S. Policy and whether it was a good thing or not. And on the face of it, yes, there were many benefits. But I think what I really want to say today is there's no question the United States is a good ally in the broad scheme of things. There are other allies that we could choose, global allies, but in the context of Trinidad and Tobago and our history, not necessarily that of other countries, but certainly our history, generally it has been a good history, a good story. What concerns me, and I put a caveat to what I'm saying, that is that I'm not an advisor to the Prime Minister on national security issues, nor on foreign policy. So anything that I do say will be said based on my having done international relations. Yes, that didn't impact me, but also, of course, reading on the issue. And so what I wanted to go back to look at, and hopefully in looking at how we as a country approach the issue of America's zone of peace, America's invasion, so to speak, quote unquote, of Iran, as well as the Monroe Doctrine, which is the gunboat diplomacy, the 21st century version of it. Is that in Trinidad and Tobago's interest? And what is the price that we are paying to align ourselves with America's policy? So the first thing I wanted to start was the economic benefits. I did say them last week, but I want to go back to them because one of the things, and I think the Minister of Energy has stated that, obviously the increase in the price of oil and gas and the Strait of Hormuz, I can't pronounce, H-O-M-U-Z, which is blockaded by Tehran.
Strait of
Hormuz, H-O-M-U-Z.
Hormuz, I think it
Hormuz,
is.
I think it's pronounced Hormuz. Yeah, I think you're right. It represents 20% of the global supply of oil and gas. And so for energy-producing economies such as ours, on the face of it is good news, because that means our oil and gas prices go up. And so that we would say, well, the invasion by United States and Israel into Iran is something that is good for us. But let me just talk back a little bit. I think that whatever we look at, whether it's economic, whether it is sphere of influence, which we look at through the Monroe Doctrine, essentially it's America asserting itself as a unipolar power, superpower, and using whatever it can and what it can justify in order to advance its cause. America was in that position during World War II. It wants to be back in that position, and whether it is through Latin America and the Caribbean being its backyard and therefore its sphere of influence, whether it is going to have the economic power that it had and use sanctions, and that is what it has to be able to do, use sanctions effectively. America's hegemony is at the core and center stage of all that America is doing, and we as a Caribbean country, I mean, part of that whole process is finding itself being, I don't know if
in the middle?
In the middle, in the center. So I want to start with the economic issue. The economic issue last week, I did say that there is a benefit because you're looking at the tariff-free for fertilizers, ammonia, and urea.
The downstream products.
Right, downstream industry. We also looked at the fact that, of course, oil and gas prices have gone up and we are an energy economy. But I think one of the things that I did not focus on, I want to mention today, is that when oil prices go up, the negative downside of that is inflationary pressure. Because oil and gas are used to manufacture your goods, oil and gas are used as transportation. So any goods and services that you produce externally in the foreign market, the price is going to go up. If the price goes up, the cost of living goes up. And the persons most affected are the persons who are the lower income. And why do I make that point? America learned from the 7-Day War, I think it's the 7-Day War with the Arab War, where they essentially found that oil and gas prices went through the roof and they suffered as a result of that. And they took steps. So when we talk about the downside of the economic pressure, the economic benefit of oil and gas prices, it's not the same for America. America has taken mitigating steps to prevent what happened many years ago in the 1970s, which we have not been able to take, to prevent the inflation, the cost of living going through the roof for Trinidad and Tobago. What did it do? Inventory, America has a huge buildup of inventory since 2025, 2026. So that if there is any sort of attack or any sort of claim that that these oil-producing economies put on America, America has a significant buildup of inventory. America also is a net exporter of LNG. It's no longer importing it, it's exporting LNG. America has shale production, which technology has assisted it. And America has said that in the short to medium term, they are able to withstand inflationary pressures. And if you are in the central bank and you are dealing with monetary operations, one of the major macroeconomic concerns is inflationary pressures because it does increase the cost of living. For Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have those protections.
Well, given the fact that we import so much of our consumer products, including food, from America, if America's economy could be sufficiently protected, that might mean that we won't face as much shocks as we would otherwise. But the key question is if, because I'm not necessarily sure that the American economy is going to, withstand this sort of shock, perfectly.
Not only that, I think a lot of the food that we import is from the DR. If I have to look at the supermarket, a lot of the food that we import doesn't come from the United States. In any event, what about the cars that come from China and come from Asia? The fact of the matter is, once the cost of manufacturing, and Trinidad imports $7 to $8 billion US worth of food. We don't have food security that America has, and nearly every single thing that we use in this consume in this country is imported. And once it's imported, the cost is going to go up, and it's going to put inflationary pressure.
I don't think cars is that much of an issue because it would require this situation to be sustained in the long term. Food, to me, is the greater concern because you could see where that's a bit more short-term losses and gains could affect that a lot more directly.
Unimpactful. In fact, that's what they do say. They say when you're looking at the impact of inflationary pressures, it's the low income, it's the food and shelter. But the issue I really want to bring to the table, the economic benefits which America is going to have as a result of increasing oil and gas prices, as we are going to have, is not the same. America has taken measures to mitigate the impact of inflation because that is the key thing. The key thing is when your oil and gas prices go up, how is it going up? You're importing stuff, and Trinidad is an importer of manufacturing goods. When we talk about our goods and services, when we talk about our raw materials, when we talk about the input in the manufacturing sector, this is important. If the cost of those things go up, that means that when we're trading, for example, within the CARICOM region, the fact that oil and gas prices have gone up, this is a benefit to Trinidad and Tobago. We have to look at the downside for us, which does not apply to America, because America has taken measures to avoid inflationary pressures, which increase prices, not only because they're not as an importer of goods and services as we are, but they've taken steps, whether through inventory, shale production, whatever steps they have taken, they have mitigated the impact of the increase in oil and gas prices, which Trinidad and Tobago, although it is a beneficiary of the economic status of oil and gas for our country, there's a downside which America does not have. So one of the things we have to bear in mind whenever we're talking about, when we are talking about what is it for Trinidad and Tobago and our Prime Minister to support America's interests, whether economic or what I would say is military, and when I say military, I use it in a very broad sense in terms of the Monroe Doctrine, the gunboat diplomacy, Trinidad and Tobago being part, as Latin America and the Caribbean, and being part of the American sphere of influence. We have to always bear in mind America is America first, as it should be. America's interest, America reasserting itself as a superpower. And Trinidad and Tobago is seen as assisting America in achieving that. And there is a price. So let me just say, I've spoken about the economic benefits. I've spoken about the fact that there's a downside to it.
I just want to point out, while we did enjoy increased revenues with the energy prices spike with the initial war in Ukraine, that first period, that also coincides when cost of living and food prices also went up, a situation which I don't think a lot of people around the world on the lower income brackets have really recovered from to say, well, we're comfortable now. So the problem is not just that you could have a negative effect here, but also it could potentially compound the previous shock from 2022 because inflation stopped. That doesn't mean that the food prices in a lot of cases went down overall. They just kind of stopped increasing, and we've been able to kind of manage the new normal. But if it goes any further, it might, you know, put a lot of people who already have difficulties affording
this country.
food in this country. Yes.
And the thing too is, what they have said is that the war in Iran is not the same as the war in Ukraine. They don't expect it to be short term. I don't know if you think that the war in Ukraine is the short term, but the approach of
well,
Iran,
at the time when it started, no one expected the war in Ukraine to last so long.
Right. So why I'm saying that is when you look at the economic implications of the increase in prices of oil and gas is far more long term than one would have anticipated that happened to Ukraine. And Ukraine was bad enough. So I'm just saying that we need to look at the economic side. There's also to America's war, economic benefit they've used is the Iran invasion. They have used Iran invasion as a means of creating regional security, as minimizing the impact of the nuclear arms. But what is the real reason behind America going after going after Iran? Well, according to them, China raised Iran's trades with China 25-year, $400 billion strategic partnership significantly bolstered Tehran against U.S. sanctions while challenging U.S. global hegemony. China is not only Iran's top trading partner, it absorbs 80% of Iran's exports, providing a crucial economic lifeline that undermines U.S.-led inflation isolation efforts. China's primary purchase of Iranian oil at significant discount allows Iran to bypass international, and that means United States sanctions. In geopolitical alignment, resisting U.S. pressure in China, with China using influence to support Iran on internal matters. So the thing about Iran, it's yes, maybe there is some issue with the nuclear armament and reducing nuclear capacity of Iran, but Iran has much more to do with America seeing Iran as a threat to America's hegemony, which it is very much pursuing. Certainly, Donald Trump is doing that. And you see that Iran, the greatest threat to America reasserting itself seems to be China. China with rail and road coming into Latin America and the Caribbean region. So that what you see now in terms of the economic price that we are paying and America is paying, it's not so much that America is concerned about the economic or the nuclear armament of Iran, but is more concerned that Iran is asserting itself and assisting China in becoming the unipolar power, a superpower, and ability to use sanctions. So having said that, we looked at the economic position, looked at Iran invasion, U.S. invasion of Iran, and I don't think it has so much to do with nuclear armament as much as to do...
I actually would say I think it's all of the above, because the Israelis, to them, that's what they're concerned with, right? To some of the other Gulf states, they are just concerned with Iran at all. I know Saudi Arabia, the very controversial crown prince, does not have anything nice to say about the deceased supreme leader. Not that all the Gulf states are, in the Persian Gulf are happy for what's going on, right? And then, of course, Iran was an arms exporter to Russia, so there's also that dimension there. So, but you're right to say that the economic ties to China and the large amount of oil exports to China is not a factor.
It's a major factor.
It's a major factor, right? America. But I will say that I suspect there's more than one incentive here,
yeah,
right?
But I think to me, all roads seem to lead back, and that includes the Monroe Doctrine, or the version of the Monroe Doctrine we're seeing played out through the Shields of America, and our Prime Minister being invited and attending the meeting in Doral, Florida, is all part of America reasserting itself as preeminent power and ability to use sanctions. And that is why even the zone of peace argument that our Prime Minister has been articulating as if Trinidad and Tobago and the CARICOM region is not a zone of peace. But I would like the Prime Minister to tell me how she defines a zone of peace, because my understanding of that definition came out of 2014 when they had a meeting of the Caribbean and Latin American countries, and they decided what constituted a zone of peace. And I find it very difficult that our Prime Minister is saying that because we have gang warfare, because there's domestic gangs or domestic crime, that means that we cannot be a zone of peace. I don't think they're not the same. When they talk about a zone of peace, they are not talking about the domestic issues. You have a Ministry of National Security, you have Interpol, you have all those international criminal agencies that operate together in order to deal with crime, global crime, whether it is money laundering, whatever the nature of the crime is that we are facing, global crime. We have all those agencies to deal with that. But when you are using the zone of peace and telling CARICOM that the CARICOM is not a zone of peace, and therefore, as people understand it, justifying America's intervention in Latin America and Caribbean countries, including Venezuela, that is how it comes across. That is how it comes across, because the definition of zone of peace, I have it here, it says a diplomatic declaration affirming the Caribbean as a region free from interstate, not domestic, interstate war, prioritizing dialogue, jointly upholding sovereignty. This was a declaration of 2014 where the states committed to resolving disputes peacefully and resist external aggression despite ongoing challenges of domestic crime and violent crime. So the key components are free from war, external military intervention, respect for international law, promoting peace, friendly relations, respect for the right of a state to choose its own system. So all of that, why would our Prime Minister not support it? I cannot understand. Why would she not say that Trinidad is not a zone of peace? You cannot say that because a country has domestic criminal activity, yes, that may facilitate and may weaken your infrastructure, but you cannot use that as a justification and go to CARICOM that made this declaration in 2014 to resist external aggression. Why is it that Trinidad and Tobago finds itself apparently taking a position that if United States goes after these cartels, as we understand it, that they are justified in doing so because the region is not a zone of peace. It seems to many people who look on that this argument for the zone of peace and saying that the CARICOM region is not a zone of peace seems to be a justification for American foreign intervention. And she says, this is what they said, this is from the Passage, so she said it's false. She says there's a high level of domestic crime. Nobody's saying there's a high level of domestic crime, but we are not talking about that. We are speaking about foreign intervention, respect for international law. That is what we're talking about. The argument equates internal tranquility with absence of a geopolitical zone of peace. Diplomatic interstate framework. Anyway, the bottom line is that the Prime Minister of our country seems to be promoting to CARICOM that we are not a zone of peace because we have a high crime rate.
I actually now started to think.
Yes.
Because it's really a semantics thing. If the Caribbean wants to say zone of peace because we don't appreciate foreign intervention, fine. Right? The Prime Minister is saying, no, we're not peaceful because X, Y,
But you don't understand why she's saying that?
But
why is she saying that?
Well, this is the thing. I actually think, because I believe more than Karen, right, and this I think might be an example of that the Prime Minister is applying her domestic thought processes to international. Because when you get down to it, it's somewhat of a lazy argument. You say it's a zone of peace, well, I'm just gonna say this obvious whatever to try to pull you into debate about what a zone of peace is, as opposed to actually dealing with the issue of, well, not everybody wants American intervention, and how do you justify that? She's not looking to try to have that debate. She's just saying, well, it's false. Well, at the end of the day...
it is false because in order to justify America intervening in the sovereign and independent nations, whether it's Venezuela or other Latin American countries, the Prime Minister takes the position, it is justified. It is justified because that zone of peace that they declared in 2014 is on where the paper it was written on. Because as long as you have domestic gangs operating and high level of criminal activity in a country, It is not, but that is not what a zone of peace means.
This is a subtle difference, but I feel as though if she formally and respectfully rejected the notion as opposed to trying to debate what she thinks it's supposed to be as opposed to what they think it's supposed to be, and all of a sudden the debate is what a zone of peace is, right? If you just say, respectfully, while I appreciate that, Trinidad and Tobago will be inviting foreign intervention, blah, 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 blah.
She can't say that.
Right?
She can't say that. How could you stay as an independent in 2026 that you are allowing a foreign country who has not been invited into your country to come in and use military power to overthrow the legitimate government of your country? Today it is you, tomorrow is another. You cannot do that. She cannot be seen to doing that. So what she has done, and this is my opinion,
to be fair
to
her, she technically, publicly, not saying this was the actual meaning, said that we are not supporting regime change, technically. Which means that when she said we're not a zone of peace, she was, how to put this, boy? It was almost like she was trying to have a cake and eat it too.
She wanted to stay away from being seen as being a war hawk. She didn't want to brand herself that.
But she said kill them all.
Yes, but what she has said, she has used the argument of the cartels and the gang warfare and the drugs in this region as a basis for saying the region is not a zone of peace. That is not what the Caribbean and Latin American countries meant. They meant that the United States or any other superpower cannot intervene militarily in their country, take over their country, create economic and political disruption, put in allegedly a puppet regime, stage a number of coup d'etat, which is the history of Honduras, which is the history of the Dominican Republic, which is the history of many of the Central American and Latin American, Haiti, Latin American countries, where America, on the basis of protection of these countries, in interest of these countries, protecting them against and also providing national security, have used that as a basis for intervening and ensuring that it has the financial and economic power to control those countries. And all I'm saying, this is 2026. This is not back in the day. The Prime Minister to come out and say what she don't say. Listen, I was a minister myself. I did international issues. I'm not saying I could read the Prime Minister. I can't read what she's thinking. But I darn well know that if I were in her position and I wanted to advocate the intervention of the United States in Venezuela, if I wanted to advocate the intervention of the United States in Iran, if I wanted to see another version of the Monroe Doctrine being created within the Caribbean region so that America now can say that Latin America and Caribbean is part of its backyard, I will have to start from some foundation, and the foundation has to be that we are not a zone of peace, and therefore if America comes into our jurisdictions, it is to provide a national security that is lacking. All I am saying is my understanding of zone of peace is not is dealing with interstate external foreign aggression and not domestic issues. And if it is domestic issues that you're dealing with, that is why you have a Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Homeland Security, and all these international agencies to assist you in dealing with that. But to use that, it comes across, and CARICOM seems to be saying that. CARICOM seems to be saying that you are using the argument that the CARICOM region is not a zone of peace, and therefore America needs to step in and protect us, means that it's a justification that you are creating for American intervention in Latin America and in the Caribbean region. That is how it is coming across. That is how it is coming across.
No. I know that. It's just that if you kind of look at the timeline of what she said, she's trying to, like I said, have a cake and eat it too. We're not a zone of peace, but we're not endorsing regime change.
But of course she can't be seen. How could she be seen? That is why she's using zone of peace argument. Nobody could argue and say we don't have domestic criminal activity
but
in
I
this
think
country.
we spoke about it when it happened, that at the end of the day, once America went in and took Maduro, it kind of made all of her declarations that we're not supporting regime change at best hollow, right? So now in hindsight, we could basically look at that part of her foreign policy messaging and say,
and she has
this is not consistent here with regards to what you're doing. Right? And I could appreciate, I don't know if Mexico signed on to a zone of peace. I know that they have used military force to deal with their cartel situation. Ecuador has invited and utilized American military force to deal most recently with a situation of their own. So now I guess the question is, diplomatically, how do you keep this whole thing from becoming a mess? Because it seems as though after the deed is done and America has left, what's interesting is at the CARICOM conference, she doubled down on that line of messaging. And you could argue the most important part of that CARICOM speech was it even necessary anymore, right?
She's talking to America. She's talking to Marco Rubio, and she's talking to President Trump. And that's why she got invited and attended the Shield of Americas, which is part of America's extension of its gunboat diplomacy. We started on a good reason. They were fighting against European colonialism, which used military and naval forces to enforce debts, customs duties. They send their people there, they send their naval forces to enforce the payment of debts. America said, no, this is our sphere of influence, and we're going to protect it. However, moving from a protectionist position, American position in terms of the Monroe Doctrine, to which our Prime Minister not only attended, but was invited and is seen as a third force as protecting America's interests. And it has been sold to us that it is done for our national security, having a regional presence of the United States to deal with the cartels, to deal with the drug, which is the major basis upon which America is seen to be a benefit to us, to deal with the cartels. What we are seeing that the experience of many of the Latin American countries has not been one where America has gone into those countries and created the stability that those countries require. We have Honduras, we have Dominican Republic, we have Haiti, we have Panama. There are country after country where America has gone into those countries on the basis ostensibly of creating economic stability. And what the history has shown, and this is not me telling you, this is what I've read, that they have talked about economic instability, political instability, puppet regimes, and coup d'etat. Do we want that in Trinidad and Tobago? Do we want that in the Caribbean region? So all I'm saying is that when we talk about the Monroe Doctrine and the gunboat diplomacy, it is part of America asserting itself as a unipolar superpower, both economically and militarily. This is their area of influence. And the only thing that my concern is, the only concern is that we have to be measured and careful, because you realize that the CARICOM region countries are not coming out and saying what she's saying.
No.
Nobody, and you're not going to tell me they don't understand what is at play.
Not just that, because you would assume Guyana is on a similar boat to us. They were also at the summit.
And they're careful.
There are rumors, well, not rumors. Jamaica had a representative, but I believe it was a former high commissioner. What that means, if they're going to join the coalition or not, is not clear. As much as there's a report in today's papers that says, there are reports that they might soon sign on themselves and the Bahamas. But to say that that's a certainty, can't say that right now. But I think to your point, it's not just that the other members of CARICOM are not saying what you're saying. Guyana is, as far as I'm aware, maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, you find the comments from me of Irfan Ali or any other member of the Guyanese government being as bombastic as our Prime Minister. And one of the things is, yes, you have to be concerned about what America, as with any other major nation, is doing that has any sort of influence in your region. But more importantly, not only have we decided to ally ourselves closely with the Americans, but it's almost as though our government is like the unofficial mouthpiece, attack dog cheerleader to say certain things that nobody else is going to say. And to what extent now will we be held accountable for that? Because one of the very real issues or consequences is, as much as the Prime Minister tried to say that Trinidad will always be a part of CARICOM, whether you agree with the other members of CARICOM or not, the practical reality is this is politically, even though CARICOM is not technically a political entity like the European Union, this is politically significantly dividing CARICOM. Everybody is free to have their own foreign policy agenda, but at the same time, right now, you can't necessarily say that this sort of thing is helping to bring CARICOM closer together.
And it comes back to the point about U.S. hegemony. They said the Monroe Doctrine is a military-first approach. is to restore United States preeminence in the backyard and aimed at China. China is its primary focus, breaking China's economic and infrastructural influence in the Caribbean and Latin America through its Belt and Road Initiative. So all I am saying is America has found a great cheerleader in our Prime Minister. They invited her to the Shield of America, and she has agreed that if they attack Ghana, Trinidad and Tobago is going to be, I don't know if you say helpful, but certainly...
Well, we'll support whatever to aid in defense of Ghana, that is understandable.
And military, there's a military operations. I believe that is what she has agreed to have, a military operation in Trinidad. We already have the, is it called not the scanner, the
radar. There's a radar site. There's also U.S. officials here to consult with our emergency management, and I'm not sure if that's the same
and
people.
All of it to say that we have a huge transshipment issue with regard to drugs and the cartels, and that America is there to protect Trinidad's interests. And you could not get a better cheerleader to articulate that position than our Prime Minister. And what I'm saying in regard to that, I am not saying that she is not found herself in a difficult position. America understands that it wants to retain, it wants to go back to its glory days of World War II. And if being part of that, creating that glory days, returning to its position, Trinidad is going to assist it, then I understand why our Prime Minister would want to be seen as being not necessarily a cheerleader, an ally of America. Is she going too far? I think maybe she is. I think that she is fracturing the trade in the CARICOM region, for which Trinidad and Tobago, you corrected me, you said it's the second largest trading partner.
That's what I was told. I don't vouch to be an expert, but I believe that to be true. America is our main one. That's where our downstream industry exports go to. But local manufacturing trades with CARICOM, and that might be, I know we export things like, of course, Angostura export bitters, and then Chubby's exported to North America and alcohol beverages. But I think a lot of our consumer, that level of products, it's with CARICOM, and if that exports might to some extent eclipse the North American exports. I could be wrong with that, but regardless, that's our second biggest trading partner.
So all I'm saying is that I do understand why our Prime Minister wants to align herself with the United States, because right now they are calling the shots in this part of the world, in part of the globe. However, is it necessary for her to go as far as she has gone? Because it goes a lot to her credibility, in my respectful opinion, and there are a lot of risks. One of the risks is, as I said, fracturing the CARICOM integration movement. I don't see that the CARICOM countries have stood behind her. I think she has stood alone, and she's prepared to stand alone. Is that something that is good?
Now, I do think that on some level, Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago right now,
but they have the same interests.
Is in almost like a block, as in, look, you're all not concerned about our problems, we'll be concerned about our problems, for better and for worse.
But do you hear from Dr. Irfan Ali speaking out as our Prime Minister has?
Exactly.
I mean, I can't...
Well, this is why I think part of it is the way how our politicians, I believe, how they deal with their internal politics that informs them how they deal with national politics. That's why it looks so not professional at times. And then how they deal with our domestic politics, I fear this is how she is taking that experience and utilizing it for her foreign policy messaging. Right?
Absolutely.
Because the bombastic statement started domestically with empty the matic. And then she said, kill them all.
Yeah, but you know what? Maybe again, I might take my experience in international relations and my experience in that. That was not my chance. She prepared, and people see down the line. She's not going to come when it happens to say that. She prepared and she said, look, I said it before. I was supporting America's position against the buildup of cartels. And she did that.
Well, remember, Biden was in charge at that time, I believe, right?
That's true.
Biden was, right? But I'll say this though, and this is one of the interesting things of 2026. I do think the world overall is getting more aggressive. The difference is America's a democracy. And if Donald Trump goes too far, you know, popular support for him, his party, and his agenda might bottom out. Right now, I think the Iran war is at best 50-50, right? If not, I think some reports say the majority of Republican voters are not in support of this.
No.
The economic issues are the main reason why, right? The difference is if China does things that are controversial and aggressive, it's a one-party state. You're not getting rid of Xi Jinping so easily. So I could understand why the Prime Minister thinks, look, I need to keep up with what's going on but at the same time, how far is too far? Because as you say, is the bombastic messaging necessary?
Yeah,
right?
But they clearly have found being positive for people like Marco Rubio. Clearly they invited her to the Shield of America.
Because some of the things that our Prime Minister says, even the US government doesn't actually say. Right? I don't believe the US government has come out to condemn the Zone of Peace declaration and say
it's her
not
job to do that. It's not their job to do that, because if they were to do that, it would just reinforce the idea that America's interventionist initiative or interventionist objective to the Caribbean region. So let a Caribbean leader say it. Let a Caribbean leader be the one that comes out and say that there is no zone of peace and we need America to come in.
Think of the implication. You're implying that the US president is able to control himself from saying the most bombastic thing that comes to mind, and our Prime Minister...
You know what I found, what I realized? When I would think that the Prime Minister, with all due respect to President Trump, had been over the top in his statements, you go back to the history of United States foreign policy, and much of what he's saying and doing now, the American backyard, Latin America and Caribbean being their backyard, their interest in reasserting America as a superpower, and China being a made adversary or threat. Much of that is not new. America has taken a position that right now, and the reason for that, which is the final point I will make, is sanctions. Your sanctions cannot work, your sanctions cannot be effective unless you are a major player, a global player, and you're a major global player economically when your currency is the international trade settlement currency, when your currency is the foreign exchange reserve currency. And what is happening to America? You are finding more and more these BRICS countries, China, Russia, India, all of these countries moving away from allowing America to dominate the global or the economic global in geopolitics and moving away from that. And what I would say for Trinidad, we become very vulnerable to sanctions because the more we are dependent on America for our economic health or economic recovery, the more and more we are vulnerable to America using sanctions to weaponize it against us. And we have to be careful about that because it has happened to Venezuela. And Venezuela, with all due respect, is more a victim of not political refugees, but economic refugees. If America decides that they're going to use sanctions against Trinidad, for example, where are we going to send our natural gas? Where are we going to send our ammonia? And not only will they ban you from exporting to those partners, but they also tell other countries that they did to Shell. Why did Shell stop building that pipeline from the Dragon Field to the Hibiscus platform? Because they were told that they were going to be blacklisted. So they don't have to exercise direct control over your country's economy. So all I'm saying is I understand why we as a country want to be seen as aligned to the United States. I understand that, but we also have to be mindful of the price we're going to pay. And if we are going to be mindful of that, I don't know if our Prime Minister needs to be seen as espousing the kind of rhetoric that she has been known to do in the last few weeks and putting Trinidad in a position I think that's very vulnerable, and especially where America has shown that it's using Trinidad and Tobago. So according to the report that I read on the summit, the Shields of America, Trinidad as a third force, as the next barrier, as a firewall between itself and the so-called other superpowers. I don't know if Trinidad and Tobago wants its foreign policy to be seen to be anti-CARICOM. It wants to be seen as being so pro-United States that it loses its sovereignty and independence. That is the hallmark of any country in a modern society. So I support the Prime Minister, but I think she needs to tone it down. I think she needs to use less language that is aggressive, and she needs to be seen as more measured in her response, as other CARICOM countries have. I haven't heard any of the other countries, as I said, maybe Ghana has, but many of the countries have remained silent. They have remained quiet, and they depend on tourism. They depend on the U.S. Support in order for their economies to do well. So, final say on this, I dealt with it last week. I thought I wanted to do a deeper dive in Trinidad and Tobago's alignment with U.S. foreign policy, whether it is a good thing, whether we are paying too high a price, and whether it is time for our Prime Minister to be seen to reduce, to turn down the rhetoric which seems to put Trinidad and Tobago in a very vulnerable position in relation to sanctions and in relation to military intervention, because that is probably where we're heading.
So I'll disagree with you on this point. I don't think military action is to support a situation where they could now reaffirm the effectiveness of sanctions. I think this is more an ends unto itself. Military action changed the dynamics in Venezuela. Military action, I guess, is just, I don't know exactly how they want to change the dynamics in Iran, but that's what they're seeking to do. So part of it is because Russia kind of opened that door with their own military action, as well as the fact that, now, I don't know if it's going to be true, but essentially everybody seems to assume China attacking Taiwan is a matter of not if, but when, right? Given their military buildup and the fact that the military buildup could only mean certain things, right? Now, I'm not saying that it's guaranteed to happen. That's just the perception around a lot of international experts in the Southeast Asian region, military, political, otherwise, right? As one U.S. Analyst said in the U.S. Naval War College, when people say what they intend to do, believe them, and they point up China's own messaging, basically claiming Taiwan. So to some extent, that's why I say I think the world is getting more aggressive, and I'm not entirely sure if sanctions are necessarily the end goal. It might still be a tool that they want to shore up.
They use it in Venezuela.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, what was the thing that what was the final act with regards to the Venezuelan situation for this American president? It was to go in and remove Maduro.
And why? Because the people of Venezuela had suffered. They were eating out of garbage cans.
Right,
people of Venezuela were leaving in droves, coming to Trinidad, going to Colombia, going to any country where they could find a job because they were under tremendous medical.
But notice the Venezuelan government was not changing its stance on the sanctions. But once Maduro was removed, all of a sudden, America is able to put certain things in place to capitalize on Venezuelan oil.
Because they ease up the pressure on those countries. In other words, all I'm saying is the use of sanctions, as I understand it, is tied to America asserting itself as a superpower. And that Trinidad and Tobago needs to be careful that it's aligning itself to United States initiatives or objectives, that it does not find itself vulnerable.
Well, that's why I say my interpretation might technically be even worse. That it's the use of military power that now major countries are looking to assert themselves, and the United States being the biggest one in that regard, assert itself across the globe, wider than, say, China or Russia. And our association with that, in a way, might have even greater consequences than if it was just utilizing diplomatic and economic pressure like sanctions, because now you're talking, that's what the Iran situation is. It's a shooting war that to some degree we technically endorsed, and we don't necessarily know what the diplomatic and political fallout is going to be like, because if you go too far endorsing things that go too far, we can't control the outcome of it and what the violence is going to happen, how many civilian targets might be mistakenly hit. At some point, it doesn't matter if it was a mistake or not. You know, if we rubber stamp it, well then...
So what's the answer? And I think we could wind up on that.
We do have a caller, but yes, the challenge, of course, is what is the alternative? That's the problem, because I do think we need United States assistance. There are, well, yes.
Tone it down. Do like other CARICOM countries. And by the way, before we move on, these states of emergency, when they open, when they started...
Well, hold on. We do have Claxton Bay. So stick up on that. Claxton Bay, good morning. You on the air?
Yeah, hi. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, good morning. Mr. Shearer and Sean. Mr. Shearer, I like how you joined that point. I think for the first time I hear, for the longest while, someone like you drawing that reference of what's going on. Because a lot of people in our country here, I think, is very naive, and believing that America going to save us. You understand? Not recognizing that, hey, we only putting ourselves in harm's way because we have a lot of superpowers out there. We have a lot of people with power and might, and they don't like America. So why we should have someone who should put a small country like us in this kind of harm's way? You never even come and speak to the people. You just jump on a situation just like that, and telling us that we support America. We didn't sign up for that. All who vote, I sure they didn't vote for this kind of aggression that is taking place today. We can lose our lives easy. You understand? Easy like that. I need for people like you, Sean, and Mr. Shearer, and many others to start taking this government to task and let them talk to the people and let us know what is really going on. And if we agree with what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. So, I mean, I think he brings up a point that I thought about yesterday that we didn't speak about, that the Prime Minister might be underestimating. Yes, there are people who support Donald Trump and are very pro-American, right? Then there are people in the middle. Then there are people who are very either anti-American, regardless of who's there, or anti-Trump, right? So on some level, her foreign policy could directly translate to her domestic approval rating. Not necessarily with the entire population, but it'll just be another factor. Because I think one of the things that the caller was saying was just that, with regards to people not necessarily wanting to be involved, not necessarily trusting this thing, right? Now his concern is that we might get a backlash of violence, which right now that's not necessarily likely, but to say that it's impossible, that would be naive to say, right? Because you never know how the world will change.
I just want to say it's not anything pro-American or anti-American, you know.
No, but I know that, but to me, and I'm surprised.
For me,
right?
I am not saying that what I have said is against America or for America. All I'm saying is good for us as a CARICOM country to maintain a certain level of independence and sovereignty. We fought hard for it. Let's maintain it. And what the Prime Minister is doing, which is what I guess he's saying, I didn't hear all of what he said. I guess what he's saying is she's taking as a country, representing to the rest of the world that we are willing to sublimate. We are willing to give less importance to our sovereignty as other CARICOM countries have fought so hard for, in order to be seen not only as an ally but a cheerleader of America. Is she going too far? Is it necessary for her to go that far? I think she thinks so, because clearly the fact that we were able to get the tariff relief, clearly,
also the OFAC license.
OFAC license, clearly she sees that as a benefit to Trinidad, and therefore the justification for her to continue to support America. But you see, and I'm not making any judgment on Donald Trump. I'm not part of the American politics. I am not part of the internal politics. I am not making a judgment on him. I am not there to say that America is not right to make America first again. That was America's policy pre-World War II, and it paid well, and it was good for them. I am not saying that that should not be other countries. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is to align yourself so openly and in such a robust way with a U.S. policy. Is it good for your country to be seen to be doing that? And she has done that, and she has done it unremittingly. She has done that almost in every opportunity that she has to come out and be seen as being a great supporter of the President Trump, Marco Rubio. Is that what we as an independent, sovereign country want from our Prime Minister? Or do we want a Prime Minister that manages herself in a dignified way, in an independent way, respecting the United States? You have to respect the United States. But do we have to go as far as she has? Because in a way, what I'm understanding the gentleman to be saying, although I didn't hear all he said, he seems to be seeing that as a betrayal of the people of this country.
And here's an interesting thought. As much as she won the election with a significant margin in terms of votes and seats over her political rival, you have to also consider the caveat, the context that it was 54% of the voting population.
Not only that, and just to cut you, not only that, when the declaration was made about a zone of peace, I don't think that people in Trinidad and Tobago were against that. I think we were glad for that. We wanted to be seen like Barbados.
The thing is, when so few of the voters voted, even though you have a majority, do you really have a mandate to be so aggressive? We have Karen Ash waiting on the line. Caller, good morning, you're on the air.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Morning, caller. No, mute the TV and speak to us through the phone. Have the conversation through the phone.
Pardon?
Mute the TV. Don't follow the television. There's a delay. Talk to us through the phone, caller.
Okay. All right.
Caller, mute the... Caller, did we lose the call?
I think so.
Okay, all right.
Maybe you can call back though, because
caller,
I want to hear what the...
Caller, are you here? Are you with us?
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to congratulate the...
Caller, don't follow the TV. Mute the TV.
Just hold a sec. Just a sec. Just... okay, just... Oh, fuck. Where you having? Yeah. Yeah, just one... okay, just hold it. Yes. Right. Good morning. I'd like to congratulate the station, okay, for this debate, and in general its approach to problems which affect us directly. Congratulations to Mr. Scherer, okay, for making very clear, okay, a position. It's not only a position that's her position, it is something and some ideas which should be made available to the public as a whole. Congratulations. And the previous speaker, okay, I think that he made very much a great deal of sense. And I think the public should be exposed to these ideas. Congratulations and continue the good work.
Oh gosh, thank you.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you so much. And we work hard at it, huh? We work hard at it, because I have to say, I've said it before to Sean, but the thing about WSN, I've never been told what not to say. I have never been told, do not go down. What I will do is I try to be responsible.
Yeah.
So that whatever I come to say...
Don't want to slander nobody.
Huh?
That's the one rule. Just don't slander nobody.
No, you don't want to do that. So whatever you say is fair comment, which you're entitled to give, and also back it up with data. And once you back that, you're entitled to an opinion. And I'm thankful to the caller, because I do feel a sense of responsibility to, as a media house, to be able to educate, or to, I don't think I want to use the word educate, but at least to inform members of the public so they can form their own opinion. Because what is going on the global stage affects us, and we have to be mindful of the fact that when the Prime Minister makes her statements, I do not know what advice she's getting from national security. I do not know what advice the Prime Minister is getting from foreign policy advocates. But I do know that the people of this country have a right to understand that what is in it for us and what are the challenges. And it is in no way a reflection on the United States. The United States is going to look after the United States interests.
I think part of it is there are, at least in the Western world, there's a subset of people, once Trump does it, they disagree with it. Right? Which, listen, I'm not saying everything he does is right. You should be free to criticize him and what he does based on the merits of each individual situation.
Can I just say this? Much of what I have learned from the Monroe Doctrine, the gunboat diplomacy, going back to going after Iran because of China's relationship with Iran. What the Prime Minister, what President Trump is doing, you may not agree with it. You may not agree with it, but he came out, make America first again. Now, you don't have to agree with that. You are not an American, But what he is doing is consistent with making sure that America reasserts itself as a superpower which is under threat from countries, in particular China. So I don't know, you know, sometimes people make President Trump seem as though he's not clear in his policies. But I have learned, and this is my opinion, that he's very clear about what his policies are. He may say it in a way, his rhetoric may perhaps not be as elegant as one would want from a leader, but what he says is consistent with American foreign policy.
And make no mistake, every country, their primary agenda is to the interests of their own country. Every country.
Every country.
Right? Now, we have a Rima on the line. Caller, good morning. You on the air? Caller, good morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Good morning to the panel.
Morning.
My 2 cents with respect to something you were speaking about this morning, Sean, is the license officers and the maxi driver. And I am not saying yea or nay with respect to taking any sides, but the license officer stepped out of his bound, first of all, by trying to pull the maxi taxi driver out of the maxi, even though the maxi driver had stopped in the road to pick up a passenger. And on top of that, the license officer took the key that belonged to the maxi taxi driver, and there's a way that you deal with that from a professional level. You take the vehicle number, whatever you have to do, but there are rules and regulations that govern how you go about that process. So there was no need for any physical confrontation as far as the license officer is concerned. And there are various videos that came out which will be able to show that the license officer was the aggressor at this point in time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, caller. I'll say this. Now, technically, if you like pull or touch a police officer, that is, I believe, even here, assault. So I understand. I still wouldn't condone the maxi driver resorting to any sort of physical violence. It's just one of those things where, look, and I said it, if the license officer is doing the wrong thing, you know, you can't in the moment just fight back with your fists. You kind of, to some extent, you have to let the process play out. But I appreciate the call. I appreciate the call because this just goes further to what I was saying.
Cameras?
That, yes, yes, for licensing officers, right? But also, when you have issues with trust and confidence with authority, and you have issues, there's public sentiment against the severity of the fines and road traffic. I have no problem with consistent, fair road traffic enforcement, but people might bother with the fines, right? All of a sudden now you will create a population that feels entitled to fight back any moment, and I'm like, hold on. And I think that can't be.
You know what, I think that is a problem that we're seeing. That is just, again, it's my opinion, and it is subject to, of course, being corrected. But I think that is what has happened to Trinidad and Tobago. There is a lack of confidence and trust in what the government says. So much of what they say is not consistent with what they say they're doing it for. Or, for example, the taxes. Those inheritance tax, when they can show you a video where the Prime Minister actually contradicts her support of what she's now implementing and positioning it as it's for our own good. What is for our own good? The tires, the windshield wipers, how about you drunk driving if I was driving? How about fixing the roads? How about fixing the roads and destroying your car? You know, there's a lack of trust and confidence. When you look at the call for people to come to look for jobs, where they said
the drive.
The drive.
I can't remember but I know what you're saying. Yeah, right. The recruitment drive.
Yes, recruitment drive. Over 20,000 people. They said, how many people got jobs? 1,800 people, according to what I read in the newspapers. 1,800 people got jobs of the 20,000. You can't have confidence in what this government says. You do not have. So that's why it goes back to what we started by this morning's conversation, dealing with America's Trinidad's approach to the whole issue with Iran, the zone of peace. You don't have confidence in what the government is saying to you.
We have another caller. We'll take the call. Caller, good morning. You're on here. Morning.
I want to say, first of all, that we're in a state of emergency, and that affects normal procedures. So this maxi taxi business, I don't know how the state of emergency affects that. But again, the question about Trump and America, Trump has proven to be, although he's making America great again, that is his job, he's a threat to me. And having dismantled the UN, as far as I'm concerned, has given us 4 small countries little defense against what he wants to do. We cannot stand up to the United States. Kamala cannot say to them no. And when she has involved herself in that situation, I wonder how it came to be. I know Young and Kamala had conferences with the Americans at the beginning of her term and at the end of his. I don't know what they said, but I am seeing gas put at $74 or $79 when it was $50.
I think it's more than that.
And I am wondering, I saw this morning on another station a gentleman from where it is, place that is being bombed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I saw him saying that he's here and he has been living there, but the name he has looks like it's close to somebody in the UNC government. He has the same. I don't know if they are relatives. I don't want to assume that. But I would assume that they have some information and probably something might be affiliated, some affiliation might have taken, some knowledge, some passage of knowledge might have taken place. And he's back in Trinidad. Anyway, that and the I agree with everything, but what I want to find out is how much oil does China need and where does China get its oil? And is China a superpower? And if you squeeze, you put your foot on the throat of somebody and you squeeze, and they have any means of getting that foot off, what will they do? What I also want to know is if we observe what these people did as they were attacked by America, all the people who had U.S. whatever, they attacked them. They were prepared for that. They have time to plan. What is China's plan for survival? If America is going to be great again, and nobody else must be great, what will happen in the long run? What is the, if Trump manages his business about making his country great again and doesn't allow other people to breathe, what will happen? According to Mr. Deadman, what's his name? Stalin. You have to have a nuclear weapon if you want to have an ism. And if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you can't have your ism. But China intends to have whatever ism they have. And they have nuclear weapons. This world is on a brink, is a very dangerous place. That is my opinion. And how we look at things, whether we want to sit down and study this part and that part and break it down into everything else, Trump is doing that. So my opinion is Trump is a threat. America might not be. But when you watch all the other American presidents, they had the same power and they had everything that they could have. They could have done everything. Just like Rowley could have done everything that Kamala is doing now. They could have fired all them people to get money. They could have do whatever they want to do to get money. But his choice was more, save the poor people, keep the jobs, and do patch the road. Patching the road right now, we don't have the money. We can't buy this. We can't buy the, what they call it? We can't buy the fire trucks. We can't fill the police service, whatever it is. They're waiting on money. Just as Rowley said, ban your belly till the 27th. Year 27, when things will start coming in, they're waiting on the money. They're clearing out the place. Oh, you could charge people 70% on tax on gas. When I wanted to bring in new furniture, I clear out the place. Some with the new furniture coming in, you know. Some with the preparing a place, starting thing. Don't believe that just like Trump has a plan, they have a plan. Waiting on it. The UNC has a plan. They are waiting on this money. They will fix the roads. They will do anything, but money is going to, and things are going to come from somewhere. What I don't understand, though, is how she not thinking about getting into the America to get us into Venezuela to talk to Delcy. We have to talk to Delcy. She has to get us inside there. We are supporting them. They can't be leaving it to Shell. They can't be leaving it to whoever it is. We have to get in there, and they're supposed to tell Delcy, hello.
All right, caller.
What are you doing with 50,000 barrels of oil?
Caller.
Yes?
We're out of time, so I'll have to end it there. Thank you. China's oil needs, they produce oil, just not enough. So to what extent they will see this as a strategic threat? Because ironically, part of the reason why they have an arms buildup is to protect their supply routes coming from the Middle East. It's just that usually they were looking at the various bottlenecks around Southeast Asia by Indonesia there, those shipping lanes. You would think it's wide open ocean, but when you analyze the shipping lanes in Southeast Asia, there's actually very few that goes from the Indian Ocean into the Western Pacific, right? So this is a interesting strategic conundrum for them. How will they respond? There's all of that to be considered. They might look to buy more Russian oil, right? Apparently India was on pace to buy less Russian oil, but this also affected that America's initiative there. Is China a superpower? I would say militarily,
yes,
no.
They are, but they are, you see, how you determine what is a superpower? Is military the only thing, or economic power?
That's why I said. Militarily, no.
Is there
if you want to go into
war going on right now?
Well, my fear is it's going to be more of a shooting war within the next couple of years. We have Move on the line. Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning to the panel. You see how the decision to close the refinery was a terrible error by Dr. Rowley. Look at the war with Russia and Ukraine. We'd have been making money there. Now this war, we'd have been making money there. You understand? I mean, they closed the refinery. They're going to still have to find the bullet payment from wherever it is. When people could have, the country would have been stable, you have the defense community working, and they're getting taxes and everything, right? And the balance off, and the foreign exchange will be flowing, right? So that is how we lose. You know, big time opportunities coming. We're losing big time again. So it was a terrible error with Dr. Rowley closing down that refinery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. I'll say this. I know why we will all speculate what the reason was. Regardless of whether the speculation is right or wrong, I will always be curious as to what were they thinking. Because in hindsight, and yes, we have the benefit of hindsight, but I don't think they needed the benefit of hindsight, right? Based on how things unfold, it highly suggests that that was not a smart move. So that's why I will forever be curious what exactly they were saying.
Especially when the advice they were given was that they needed to restructure rather than to close down.
And I would hazard, I guess, even if Dr. Rowley writes his memoirs and makes interviews 10 years from now, God willing, if he's still alive, I don't know if I could believe that reasoning, unless it's something so off the wall, because to me, now with the benefit of hindsight,
I mean, what was the rationale? Was it the bullet payment that was due and then we couldn't make it?
So the refinery was making losses, but when you analyze the situation, you have to ask, was it losses or was it losses because of debt you saddled onto the refinery, which could have gone somewhere else, right? Train City on the line. Oh gosh, mind blank there for a second. Caller, good morning, you're on the air.
Good morning, everybody. Sean, how are you doing? I'm Mrs. Dunes Sheriff Good morning to you. All right. I'm following the discussion. I know you had a chance to call in, was busy all the time. And a lot that you all have been saying is true. And a lot of things could be true at the same time.
Yeah.
As well as a lot of things could be false at the same time.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of dots to connect and we have to expand the dots, right? So from where I sit, historically, Mrs. Nunes Teixeira mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, which is correct. This is the U.S.'s sphere of influence. And anything like the Global South or BRICS is a threat to that Monroe Doctrine or the threat to that U.S. hegemony. The cost of that is blood and bodies. And that's par for the course. The United States are accustomed killing people using the CIA to topple government. Nothing to see here. It's a normal day, right? I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, right? But why I'm saying it tongue-in-cheek is we have to historically understand it and accept it. Well, most of us have U.S. visas. We have family living in the U.S., fine. We visited since many years ago, fine. But we must know the dark history of the U.S., right? Okay. Now, the thing about it is, as well, the United States of America is not really interested in the welfare of the people of Venezuela. The information, the misinformation services like CNN and those others spread the dissatisfaction because they said Maduro is a dictator, he did see that in the next. But we have to understand that the sanctions against Venezuela is what is linking up Venezuela internally. Sanctions against Cuba. Those people are not allowed to use their resources for their people, right? U.S. hegemony means your resources belongs to our multinationals and it belongs to our capitalist system. And that is exactly what it is. Over the years, there are nuances of free and fair democracy. Everybody has to be democratic, but we must remember that the United States supported dictators in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s in what you may call it, in Latin America. No. Winston Churchill, Dwight Eisenhower, the head of the CIA, the head of the MI6 had one job. And that job is to spread goodwill throughout the Arab world and the region. What did they do? They toppled the government of the democratically elected government of Mossadegh, who is the prime minister of Iran in 1953. Installed a puppet called Reza Pahlavi, which is the Shah of Iran. He had a very brutal police state, and the Americans supported that brutal police state. So we could tick the box of which dictator you will support and which dictator you not support. The mask and the veil is being lifted. That is what the Americans do. Sean, I heard you mention something about the China may invade Taiwan. Taiwan belongs to China. At the end of World War II, you remember China supported the Allies against Japan. You understand? No. One of the in terms of the ceasefire in 1945, it was discussed that China, it was suggested to the Chinese government that they take Japan as reparations. China said, no, we don't want Japan as reparations. We good with Taiwan. So the people who are pushing independence for Taiwan or who are pushing anti-China sentiments in Taiwan are Japanese descendants who are living in Taiwan. So those old, what you may call it, those old grudges are still there, right? Mr. What's his name? Richard Nixon recognized Taiwan as belonging to China. Richard Nixon recognized back in the day when he opened up the West to China that, okay, I agree with your one China policy. China, you here, Taiwan is yours, and that was ratified during World War II. You understand? Now, they didn't really come down on China or tell China you are ours and so on. But once Taiwan that is, but once Taiwan starts to slip to the West, bet your bottom dollar China will cordon that off. Those are historical facts.
But
nice.
Caller, I just have to ask.
Iraq.
Caller, I just have to ask. Did you decry American foreign policy and then use American foreign policy in support of another point after decrying the overall state of American foreign policy?
Repeat that.
Because American foreign...
what is the context of the question?
Sorry, American foreign policy is bad. They have their own agenda. But they signed off on China's claim on Taiwan, so that makes China's claim legitimate because America signed off on it?
That's about right. America, you know what I want to just say?
No, remember Taiwan was never independent, you know. Taiwan was always a Chinese colony. Taiwan was never really independent.
Well, no, technically, it's not a colony. China had a civil war that's technically not over. That's the losers. Fine. But that's not a colony.
So China's quote-unquote Monroe Doctrine, you know, quote-unquote, is their claim on Taiwan.
Well, okay, but Paula, listen, if we want to decry the Monroe Doctrine, then let's do it universally. If we want to decry such behavior, let's do it universally. Right? Let's say America shouldn't do things in their backyard, China shouldn't do things in their backyard. Right? But I personally wouldn't necessarily look to bother splitting those hairs. Right? But so you have a third point to make. Because we're out of time.
No, I was just saying that no, I was just providing context to the misinformation that we get about China and China being an aggressor and so on. No, I'm agreeing with you, you know. All right? If we should have a sort of a consistent, fair, justifiable foreign policy across the board worldwide. I'm totally agreeing with that. And that would include the CIA and the FBI not toppling government. Because that has been their habit since 1945.
Okay.
Right? Now, locally now, the other point I was going to make is Iran, with regard to Israel. Israel wants to expand. Israel's goal is the Great Israel. Israel's goal is the Greater Israel. Israel wants to expand beyond its border.
We're out of time. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Sorry. Apologies, but we don't have to. I do have to wrap up the show now because we're coming towards the end. So thanks for that. I understand that yes, Israel is going to have their agenda, but again, it comes back down to will countries, to what extent are we going to analyze all countries equally on having their own agenda? Now, with regards to, I'll just say this with regards to Taiwan, that's the status quo. And that is the peaceful situation currently right now. So, do I want to see military action take place? No, because it's going to be a wider conflict if that was to happen. With that said, a couple things to get through. One of the previous callers mentioned Dr. Rowley's decisions versus the current government decisions. Didn't necessarily make great decisions. That's why he was voted out. There were times when he made the right decision, but the times when he is perceived as making the wrong decision happened more often than not, hence the results. Now, the U.S. supporting some sort of negotiations between our government and the Venezuelan government, I would have thought that also to be something that we would have been able to look forward to. Not having that, it leaves me in a situation where I'm wondering, you're supporting the action in Venezuela without actually saying that you're doing it. Are we going to be in a no man's land where we have these OFAC licenses, but it's going to take forever to get deals done with Venezuela itself? Because on some level, if we're part of the deal, can the American companies successfully negotiate on our behalf? Should it be left to them? That's a very iffy proposition. Now, one of the things that I wanted to get to is, and one of the issues that comes up with all of these conversations is the ethical and moral right to spread democracy, right? In the case of, there's no clear-cut ethical or moral rights, because democracy in and of itself means that you have the right to determine for yourself. And if you are forcing that onto people, well then shouldn't they have a right to just revert back to what it is in the first place? It's a very odd thing. But our Prime Minister decided to weigh in on the situation with Cuba because I guess she feels the need to defend American action regardless. And she brought up how we are a free democracy and we would not want to live in a dictatorship. The problem I have with that is ultimately, to what extent are we questioning our democratic principles as practiced in this country right now when you have the perception of multiple instances of the government seeking to censor the population. We have some comments to get to before we close up the show, so let's take the first comment there. Now, with this comment here, I'll say this. Karen clearly articulated his concept of Zora peace. I hope Sean is finally educated on the matter. Yes, I have had to change my opinion somewhat. I still agree with regards to American intervention for our crime situation, right? I didn't necessarily never said, while I am not against military intervention, I'm not saying that I am automatically for it. I believe it is a silver bullet that will solve our problems. But yes, Karen did inform me, and I did have to modify my argument or improve it, because on some level, I would have disagreed more clearly with I would have agreed with the Prime Minister more easily if she decided to deal with the situation with a different avenue or from a different angle. But the angle she took was a messy one that potentially further divides CARICOM and continues running that risk of removing us or separating us from CARICOM, and more importantly, was it even necessary? Let's go to the next comment. The only question to ask is, what is the date for the general election? This is one of those double-edged swords questions, because ultimately speaking, this would be a bad sign, one. And two, okay, we have a general election tomorrow. I assume this is a local general election. We have a general election tomorrow. Who would we vote in if we want to vote this government out? Because we have not done a good job of properly incentivizing our politicians to act responsibly, to act with a duty of care, to act for the universal good of all, to act with transparency and accountability. Because I had some of the same complaints on the previous government. Now, there's a new opposition leadership. There's a new leadership of the People's National Movement, but it's not as though those are fresh faces that weren't there in the Dr. Crowley administration. And if part of the problem is we have situations or difficulties with trust and confidence in authority, in the government, in law enforcement, etc., we're not necessarily going to improve the situation by running back to a group that just were part of a losing effort in a general election themselves. They need to build themselves back up and to sort of re-earn trust in themselves from the public, give us a bit of a better track record to suggest why the new leadership will bring the PNM to be something different, and then they can be considered. They're potentially on that path. That's not going to happen overnight. It will be way too premature to swap one party for the other now. And given the fact that we don't have a legitimate third party to contend for the general election, in part because we as a population, we as a society, don't necessarily want to go down that path. We're stuck with trying to treat with the two parties that we do have that the population takes seriously enough to provide significant support for. But I find it very strange, given the fact that the voter numbers have reduced between the last election and now, that there's so much apathy to third parties in this country. Why? Given the fact that so many people didn't want to vote for the PNM or the UNC, why is it that there is seemingly no path for a third party to say, what about us as an alternative? Because dare I say, competition is supposed to bring about better performance, but we don't see that between the two main parties. Maybe if a third party came on the scene, they might get their act together better. But any day, what can we do? Now, Apologies, the good lady. She had to leave. She was undergoing some difficulties. Nothing too serious. Thanks to the callers for calling, and thanks to the comments. A contentious topic. As I pointed out, I don't think the Prime Minister is fully aware of how people view the United States and how complex that is. We'll see if she is better informed moving forward. If she will adjust her stance, probably not. We, however, will wait and see how things unfold with what's going on around the world. Until then, stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Never forget, it's nice to be nice. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Good morning and welcome back to Dollars and Cents. I'm Darren Jacobs, a Senior Financial Advisor, and I'm here to guide you through smart financial decisions that can protect your wealth and boost your bottom line. Now, today's episode is a bit of a touchy topic, right? And it's one that always confuses me because you ever hear somebody say they have things in place, or don't worry about that, I have things in place, or I'm setting up things, I'm putting things in place. What does that really mean? And to me, that has always confused me because I always confused by what does this actually mean?